Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the case of Bruce McArthur. And let's just say, yeah, it's a doozy. It was suggested by CD, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have. And of course, if you do have any more, please do let me know. Thomas Donald Bruce McArthur, or Bruce McArthur as he's more commonly known, was born on the 8th of October in 1951 to parents Malcolm and Esley. And that was in Lindsay, Ontario in Canada. Now, Bruce did have a biological sister, but he turned out to have a lot of siblings because his parents would actually foster children, sometimes having between 6 to 10 in their care, which is quite a lot. His parents were also very religious, but they had kind of different faiths, and that would sometimes cause issues. And Bruce would often sway towards supporting his mother, who was Irish Catholic, as opposed to his Scottish Presbyterian father. Now, growing up, he soon realised that he was more attracted to boys rather than girls. So he knew that he was gay from very early on. However, there was a massive issue with that because this was the 60s and it was in a tiny little town where nobody wanted to be noticed. So like a lot of people, he just hid it away and just didn't acknowledge it. And he would also go on to date girls. So he went to Fenelon Falls Secondary School, and there he met a girl called Janice. She was called Janice Campbell, and you know, they were kind of childhood sweethearts, I guess, but sadly he was gay, but he was like trying to pretend that he wasn't. So they carried on their relationship for quite a while. They ended up getting married. He was 23 at the time. They ended up moving to a place called Oshawa where they bought a home. He ended up getting a new job at a place called Eton, and that place was quite close to the sort of gay community area. And some things actually started happening around that time. I will get into more of that at the end of the video. You will see why it is relevant, and I don't know. We'll just look more into that later. But he ended up starting a family with Janice. He ended up having a boy and a girl, and he was very involved in the church there. He was seemingly a very generous man. He was always very busy, and it's a thought that that was potentially because he was trying to avoid his homosexual feelings. He was even on mall Santa at one point as well, and then people in his friends and things started to notice that he was getting more and more unhappy in his home life. And I mean, he kept himself busy, like I said, with the church, raising 2 children and things like that, and doing Santas. You know, he really tried to keep himself busy in that front, but then it wasn't who he was. He was gay, and he was trying to pretend to be straight, and, you know, it takes a toll on you. He also went on to get a job as a travelling salesman, which I've neglected to mention. Then, when we get to the early 90s, he actually does tell his wife that he is gay. He finally comes out of the closet to her, and they decide that they are going to stay together for the kids, kind of thing. But at this point, I believe he was beginning to have affairs with men. The family then got into some financial issues. Bruce actually lost his job, so obviously they were scraping by kind of thing at that point. But then their son Todd got into some legal troubles. He was ringing up random women that he didn't know, and basically he was doing some obscene phone calls. So yeah, he got into some legal issues, and they already were struggling. So they ended up eventually declaring themselves as bankrupt. And I guess Bruce saw that as like, I don't know, a fresh start for him, because he decided that he was going to divorce Janice and move away and start again. He was 46 years old at this point, and he moved to Toronto. And I believe this was because there wasn't really that much of a gay community around him where he lived, so he went to Toronto where there was quite a big community over there. A very well-known community too. So he seemed to be very happy with, I mean, he'd not really been able to live his true self, like him true self, I guess, all his life. So now he was doing that, and he was really happy about it. He ended up getting into this relationship with a man, which ended, and that ended up with him in therapy, and there he was prescribed antidepressants. This is when he started up this landscaping company called Arctic Design. He wanted to be his own boss and work for himself, so he started that up. It was doing really well, and despite almost being 50 at that point, you know, he was finally living the life that he wanted to live. But then this is around the time that things would take a very, very wrong turn. He was really trying to be involved within the Wellesley church community, which is the gay community. But I guess they didn't really want him. They saw him as kind of trouble. But when you see him at bars and stuff, people would have a drink with him and stuff. Nobody really thought too much about Bruce. He was often seen driving around his truck around town, obviously. Just a normal guy. Nothing was wrong. Except a lot of men began going missing. A lot of gay men began going missing in the Wellesley church area in the years that would follow. You would find it very strange where those men would end up, because most of them would end up in planters in a suburban property. Wonder what the reasoning behind that could be. So, as you've probably guessed by now, Bruce was the one that was killing people. His first actual victim that is known of was on Halloween of 2001. Now, this victim did survive the attack, luckily. A man named Mark Henderson, he knew of Bruce in passing. Like, you know, when you nod and wave and smile at people kind of thing, he would do that, but he didn't feel comfortable doing that. And he would just like sort of smile and then sort of usher away. And then one day in particular, he was going in to get his costume for this Halloween thing. And he's started unlocking his security gate, and Bruce ends up behind him. And so he holds the door open for him, and as he's fumbling with the lock, he ends up getting hit on the head with something. Now at the time, Mark actually was like, what on earth was that? He thought that the chandelier or something had fallen on top of him. So when he turns around, he sees Bruce there with a friggin' iron pipe ready to bear down on him again. So he holds up his arm as defense and ends up breaking, I believe, some fingers to try and protect himself. At this point, he'd already been hit in the head once, very hard. So he was feeling woozy and whatnot. He ended up on the floor and he managed to kick Bruce backwards. And then he scrambles for either a weapon or the phone, which he gets to the phone. And then he starts ringing 911. And then apparently Bruce said to him, please don't tell them this happened. Please don't tell them it was me. And started just fumbling around to try and get the telephone cord. But it was a really long one and he couldn't find the end of it. So he didn't manage to unplug the phone. And the call went through to the police and he was speaking to the police. Then he ended up going unconscious. And then when he woke up, there was a police officer there asking him if his attacker had gone. So Bruce left him. And I don't know the reasoning behind that, whether he was just scared because he was on the phone to the police and he didn't want to get caught. I don't know why he left, but he did, thankfully. And then Mark said that he was never really taken very seriously because he was I believe he was a male sex worker. I might be wrong with that, but I think he was. And sadly, as a sort of result of that, nobody really took him seriously. People just thought that, I don't know, it was a bit of rough sex, I guess, and they weren't even having sex at all. Even the paramedics were said, as they were strapping him in, were like laughing and joking about it. And then the police didn't really want to take a statement, you know. It was just all it was all very bad around it. He said that he felt like they didn't really care, kind of thing. And then after this, Bruce actually handed himself in. So he handed himself in, was showing remorse, things like that. Mark was being sexualized and discredited. And so it just didn't really probably end up where it should have been. I mean, he did end up getting done for it, but it was like house arrest. So in 2003, he was put on house arrest and he was banned from the gay village. Now, it was something that they couldn't enforce and didn't enforce as well. So that was his first sort of attack victim. Luckily, he survived. Let's get on to his next. Skandaraj Navathanam, who was 40 years old, was the first to go missing. He was known by most as Skandar. He was a refugee from Sri Lanka, and in 2010, he went and bought himself a puppy, which he absolutely loved. He went everywhere with that dog. He always had pictures with it, and it was very strange when he up sticks and vanishes on the 6th of September, leaving his, beloved dog behind. He was reported as missing 10 days later. He left everything behind, including his laptop, which the police did actually take in, but for some strange reason didn't do anything with. I have no idea why, but they just didn't. I don't know. And of course, they did not find him. Then Abdul Bashir Faizi, who was 42 years old, vanished. He was from Afghanistan. He moved to Canada in 1999 in the hopes of a better life. He was married with kids, and nobody knew he was gay either. He was last seen on the 29th of December in 2010 at 11 p.m. and was reported as missing by his family the next day. His car was later found abandoned in Toronto. That was on the 4th of January. And I can only assume that where it was found was like a well-known sort of gay community area, because his family was confused as to why his car would even be there in the first place, saying that he had no reason to be there, and of course they did not know he was gay, so that is why I came to that assumption. Once more, they didn't locate Abdul either. Majid Kaihan, 58 years old, missing on the 25th of October in 2012. He moved from Afghanistan to Canada, and again he was secretly gay, also married with 2 kids. He divorced and moved into the part of the town with a big gay community, and he still had difficulty coming out there. He was last seen by his son on the 14th of October, and then nothing. Police went into his home to obviously investigate him being missing, and they found that all of his birds that he kept were actually dead. Now, that was very unusual for him, because if he was going for a longer period of time or whatever, he would make sure that his birds were fed and taken care of, because he adored them. You know, he absolutely loved those birds. And so the fact that he hadn't done that was very obscure. And it meant that he wasn't planning a trip. Like, you know, he hadn't just left and like gone away for a bit, because they would have been taken care of. So now we're into November of 2012, and the police have put together a sort of task force called Project Houston. And it was put together to investigate the 3 disappearances. Apparently at first they hadn't even linked the men as of yet. And then this program was only created because of some strange phone call from the Swiss police, who said that they thought that Toronto had a cannibalistic community and that they had to look into it. I have no idea, not a clue. But then eventually the police did realise that the 3 may be connected. And I say eventually lightly. So they're looking into these people that have gone missing, and they actually come across Bruce as a potential person of interest. This was November 2013. They went and spoke to him, and not very thoroughly, I might add. They didn't know that he had tried to kill Mark in 2001, or that he had had a sexual relationship with Skander, so of course they just kind of mulled it over, questioned him a little bit, and then that was that. Project Houston went on for almost 2 years, but then it was disbanded? That's not right, is it? Dismissed. That'll do. In April of 2014, because they just didn't find any criminal evidence. In August 2015, Sarush Mahmoudi, 50 years old, disappeared. He was from Iran, and again he was married with a stepson, and then one day he left for work and he never came back. He was also a gay man. What was actually noticed is that he took his traveling bag with him, which makes him, you know, he used to do that if he was going to go away for a few days or whatever. But, you know, he wasn't just gone for a few days, he just never came back. And he wasn't seen as going missing from the village, whereas all these other men had gone missing from around the village area and he had not. So he would not be connected to the others for a very long time. Bruce, in the meantime, having, you know, taken all these men, wasn't really keeping a low profile. Because in June of 2016, he was again interviewed by the police after he had turned himself in for strangling someone. But I mean, it kind of seems like this was Bruce's little ploy. Like, if he turned himself in, was like, oh, so sorry, then maybe the police would believe him and not the other person, kind of thing. So that's kind of what he did. This man and Bruce had been having sexual relations in the back of his van, and Bruce began strangling him. He actually grabbed his arm, twisted it up behind him and began to choke him. But he managed to get free and escape, and then he called the police. So then Bruce turns himself in, and they have a discussion with him about it, and Bruce kind of flips it. He says, like, the choking was consensual, they were just having a bit of rough, you know, and then the other guy was the one that started choking Bruce, and Bruce ended up having to pull his arm and, you know, restrain him so that he wouldn't choke him. And he just flipped it all on the other guy, and the police, for some strange reason, believed Bruce. In January of 2016, Kurashina Kanagaratanam, and I apologise if I've said any of these names wrong, because I probably have, 37, is believed to have been killed on or about the 6th of January He was a refugee from Sri Lanka, was homeless, and was trying to avoid deportation when he was last heard from in 2015. Sadly, he was never reported as missing, so they didn't know about him. In April of 2016, Dean Lizowick, he was 43, he reportedly seen for the last time checking into the Scott Mission shelter. He was homeless and had lost his job at a bar. He struggled with drugs and apparently became a sex worker before he disappeared. And again, sadly, he was never reported as missing. So once more, the police did not know that he was missing. April of 2017, Salim Esen, 44, was reported missing by his ex-husband. Now, he was originally from Turkey, moved to Canada. He found it really difficult adjusting to divorce, and this is when he sadly turned to substance abuse. Things were apparently getting better though, just before he went missing, and once again he was last seen in the village like all the others barring one, and once more this was not linked to the others for a while. So now all these gay men are going missing, right, and none of them have been found. They're looking into it, they even did a freaking project on it, but yeah, they still not found any of them. And so you're starting to think that, you know, do we potentially have a serial killer on our hands? Those are the questions that were kind of floating around. But the police was like, nope, we do not have a serial killer in Toronto. Definitely not. All these gay men going missing is just some sort of coincidence. They just sort of downright refused it, when in fact there actually was. So yeah. In June of 2017, Andrew Kinsman was reported missing. He was last seen on the 28th, and he was a massive part in the gay community. You know, he would always get involved. He was such a kind, really nice, just genuinely nice guy. And he always wanted to help those around him. So police went in, they searched his apartment, they found that his cat was there without any food or water, which he adored that cat. He would have never left, you know, it with nothing. So that obviously straight away was like an indicator that he had not just left or whatever, there was something wrong kind of thing. As they carried on looking, this is when they found his calendar. On the 26th, marked on his calendar, was one name, and that name was Bruce, and it said 3 p.m. And honestly, looking into this, Andrew is what finally led them to Bruce McArthur, because they found this name Bruce on his calendar. You know, it's a bit strange that after he went to meet this Bruce guy, you know, he vanished. So they began looking at CCTV straight away, and they found him getting into a red Dodge, like caravan car thing at 3 p.m. Now, sadly, they actually couldn't get a plate of this car. They just, you know, the footage was really grainy. It was at the side, it was a side angle, so you couldn't get the license plate. But they had the name Bruce, and what they also had was that that particular model was very different from the rest of the models. It was actually a 2004 20th anniversary of that particular edition of the car. And when they searched up that specific model, along with the name Bruce, they found one person, and that was Bruce McArthur. This is when they decided to launch another project, Project Prism. That was on the 28th of July 2017, and this was looking into the disappearance of Salem and Andrew, along with sort of, you know, comparing it to those of Project Houston as well. By September 2017, Bruce McArthur was a huge sort of person of interest in these men going missing. They learned that he had been sort of interviewed 4 years prior as a person of interest at the time, but then, you know, that was that. They also learned that he had some relations with some of the missing men, and the attack in 2001 on Mac, along with the choking incident, I believe 2016 that was, that he wasn't charged for. So he was looking like a pretty good suspect. On the 8th of December 2017, the police did like an update on the Project Prism's progress, and they were really downplaying the suggestions of a serial killer in the gay village, saying that there was no conclusive evidence of that, and that any of these men actually met foul play. So again, they really did not want to have a serial killer on their hands kind of thing. Not that anyone ever does. But they did say that it cannot be ruled out that they met foul play either. So what they did is they put Bruce under surveillance at all times, and, you know, they were supposed to hang back, watch him all the time, and we're basically told that if he was ever to enter his home with somebody, a male, alone, you know, that they were to move in. Finally, at this point, police were thinking, you know, maybe we've got a serial killer on our hands. Maybe it's Bruce. Yeah, kind of thing. They also managed to get a warrant for his car, which he had got rid of at that point. But they actually found it later on, and he had not cleaned the inside or anything. They found DNA in there. They discovered different men's DNA in there. One was Bruce, one was Andrew, and the other two at the time were unknown. So they're sort of chilling outside of Bruce's apartment. It was the 18th of January 2018, and he enters his apartment with a young man. So they obviously have their orders to move in. They go in, they break down his door to his apartment, and they find him in there, in the bedroom, naked. He has a man tied to the bed, also naked, with a plastic bag around his head. And Bruce is there, literally pulling out the duct tape, ready to wrap it around his head to basically kill this person. And the police just walked in on that, and what a shock that must have been to Bruce as well. Like, unbelievable. But luckily this man was okay, you know, he survived, thank God. They came in at the perfect time. And then they literally caught him in the act, and he just denied everything. You know, no, I didn't kill anyone. I wasn't about to kill him. Go figure. Obviously, with everything they had, they could keep him in custody. They ended up getting a warrant for his apartment, where they found some strange things. They found hundreds of photos of men on, like, his laptop. Lots of them were of Andrew. They also found photos of Andrew and Salim in his bedroom, naked, with ropes around their necks. They were just very disturbing photos. And a lot of these photos were taken of men where they didn't know that they were being photoed. You know, you can kind of tell that he just kind of quickly snipped a shot of them and things like that. So it was like he was, I don't know, like stalking them as well. Of course, the police started searching properties, you know, that they thought were kind of related to him in some way or another. And that is when they got onto a place where they went to look. It was called Mallory Crescent. Now, he had worked there as a landscaper. You know, he'd done a lot of work there, apparently. So when they got there, they found five large pots in the garden. And then they brought cadaver dogs, and they marked every single one of them. So they began digging. Parts of 7 men were found inside of those pots on that property, and they would find more bones later on. In fact, they found too many bones. So they knew of, as I've already said, they knew of 6 people going missing. They found the remains of 8 people. And the 2 that I mentioned earlier, they didn't know were missing, because 2 of them were sadly never reported. So they had actually found the remains of Skandra, Abdul Basser, Majid, Sarosh, Salim, and Andrew. And obviously the 2 other men that they didn't actually know who they were yet were Krishna and also Dean. They found on this USB stick in Bruce's apartment as well, which I forgot to mention, that he had all of these folders, and they had the victims' names on. Well, when he knew the names, because some of them he didn't actually know the name. So, you know, I don't know, he would just describe them or put them as a number, I think. So he had 9 folders on there, and one of them was John, which was the guy that they actually walked in on him trying to kill, and obviously managed to save. So he had set a folder up for him, ready and waiting. He also kept a journal which described the killings in detail, and they also found some hair and other things in different landscaping locations. In 2018, Bruce McArthur was charged with the first-degree murder of all 8 men. Then in January of 2019, he pled guilty to all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole until he reached the age of 91. I believe he was like 60, late 60s, 67-ish when he was caught. And obviously, police have said that when it comes to that, it's very unlikely that he will even get parole anyway. So, more than likely, he will never get out of jail. So the police got a lot of flack for this. Obviously, not really looking into the missing persons cases very well. Things like that. And then there was a judge that actually changed a lot of things for missing people and how they are looked at. And she made it better and improved things on how they were handled and things like that. And, you know, those changes are still in force today and have obviously helped a lot of missing people's families to give them hope that, you know, maybe one day they will be found now. That's the end of the case, but a lot of people have wondered as to whether Bruce has killed more people. And, you know, there is always a possibility of that, because he has only been caught for killing 8 people. And, you know, if he has killed more than that, it's highly unlikely he's not going to admit to it, let's face it. A lot of people do not think that he started killing at the age of 56 and for the next 8 years, because looking into serial killer well, not even serial killer, just killer sort of statistics and how they were done. It's thought that a lot of people start in the 20s and 30s, and some believe that there is lots of questions in the big gap in his life between the 70s and the 90s, along with the fact that when he was caught, he was successfully murdering men and getting away with it. He knew what he was doing. Well, I can't say that because I don't know whether he did, but it seemingly he knew what he was doing. He was getting away with it. So that's led a lot of people to believe that he'd been doing this for a long time, way before when people assume he started. And then you've got when he had that job in Eton in 1975, you know, when he was in his like 20s, 30s, that was when the first of the unsolved gay murders sort of occurred. There was Harold Lockin, and then from then to 78, many more gay men would have gone missing. I believe there were like 14 of them, killed in similar ways. Another was James Kennedy, Sandy LeBlanc, Brian Letocki. Those are just a few names. I believe some of them were solved, but there's a lot that still remain unsolved, like 8 of them or something like that. And those names remain unsolved to this day. So a lot of people believe that maybe Bruce could have done it. Again, it's just speculation. Nobody actually knows, and probably ever will, unless some evidence is found on it. And the police have actually, when questioned about that, they said that they had brought up all the old cases from the 70s and are looking into it with regards to Bruce being involved. But obviously, back then, there was no mobile phone technology where you can track the data and all that lot. They're just relying on witnesses and things like that. So if nobody saw anything, you know, you never catch them. If the DNA is held up or they managed to get something like that, you know, they could do. But a lot of these cases probably didn't have that. There's a couple more names that have been possibly linked to him as well. There was a man's body found in 1989 in the eastern section of Ontario, and then there was a mysterious death of Shafiq Vikram. He vanished in 94. And just people, if Bruce was actually responsible for any of the gay killings in sort of 1970s, a lot of people don't even like to think about it, because if he did start then, how many more victims could he have had from the 70s to like the 90s and even the 2000s before his first known victim went missing in 2010? How many more victims, if that is the case, could there actually be? From what it looks, you know, it's highly possible, and even the police have stated it, that Bruce could have killed more people. And it always is possible that serial killers could have killed more than they get caught for or admit to. But the thing is that we are probably never ever going to know unless he confesses to them. And I actually read in an article about a serial killer called Samuel Little, who was an American serial killer who met this Texas Ranger at an elderly age. Like, he was elderly when he met this man. He took a liking to him, and that is when he started talking about everything he'd done, and he just didn't stop. As of 2020, he had confessed to killing 93 women across the US. And he did that in such detail that they were able to draw pictures of these victims, and it helped the police identify them from that. He is thought to be one of the worst serial killers in American history. So going back to Bruce, whether he does a Samuel Little and admits to killing more people, I mean, again, he may not have, but that's probably the only way that we're going to find out. All we do know for sure is that Bruce attacked 2 men so far. He killed 8 men, and as for any more, will we ever get that answer? Who knows? The only person that knows for sure is Bruce McArthur. What do you think on this? Do you think that he killed more people, or that he did start very late and that, you know, he just killed the 8 men? But yeah, that's the end of this case. If you guys have enjoyed the video, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway, that's all I have today on the case of Bruce McArthur. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!